Every choice carries a weight. Every action, seen or unseen, leaves a mark on the fabric of our shared human story. When people betray others through lies, greed, or disloyalty, they believe they can walk away untouched. But history, society, and the very structure of human life prove otherwise. No one escapes the consequences of betrayal, because betrayal is not just a moral failure, it is a fracture in the collective trust that holds us all together. Betrayal begins with a simple lie, the lie that you can get away with it. It whispers in the mind like a dark comfort, convincing the betrayer that their actions will fade into the background, that no one will notice, and that the rewards will outweigh the risks. It's a quiet calculation built on arrogance and denial. Yet this illusion, powerful as it may seem, is one of the oldest deceptions known to humanity. Every act of betrayal plants the seeds of its own exposure, because truth, by its very nature, resists suppression. The illusion of getting away with betrayal is temporary. It is the fragile calm before the consequences begin to unfold. The first step into betrayal is often taken with justification. People tell themselves stories to ease the discomfort. I deserve this. They'll never know. It's just business. Or it's not that serious. They rewrite the moral landscape to make space for their decisions. But these internal narratives don't erase the truth, they only delay its arrival. Each justification chips away at integrity, and integrity, once fractured, can never offer peace again. You may silence your conscience for a moment, but the echo of that silence follows you. The mind knows when it's living in contradiction. It remembers every compromise, every look away, every quiet moment when it chose self interest over honesty. There's a strange irony in betrayal. The very effort to conceal it becomes its own form of punishment. The energy it takes to maintain lies, to manage appearances, to keep stories straight, these become a heavy burden. What was meant to be a shortcut to freedom turns into a life of constant calculation. The betrayer becomes imprisoned by their own deceit, always looking over their shoulder, always fearing discovery. Even when no one else suspects a thing, they live in a private war with guilt. The illusion of getting away with it crumbles from the inside out, long before the world sees the cracks. But the consequences of betrayal are not confined to the betrayer alone. Betrayal is a ripple that spreads through relationships, communities, and even institutions. When trust is broken, it's not just one bond that suffers, it's the entire fabric of connection that begins to fray. People start to doubt, to withdraw, to question everything they once believed. Betrayal poisons the well of trust, and everyone who drinks from it feels its bitterness. You cannot betray one person without teaching others that faith is fragile. You cannot steal honesty and expect the world around you to remain whole. The illusion of getting away with it ignores the truth that human beings are deeply interconnected. What harms one eventually harms all. The psychological toll of betrayal is immense. Those who deceive often underestimate how deeply guilt embeds itself into the human spirit. At first, it may be a faint discomfort, easily pushed aside, but over time, it grows heavier, shaping behavior in subtle, destructive ways. It can manifest as anger, anxiety, or restlessness, a constant unease that no amount of success or distraction can quiet. The betrayer begins to distrust others, assuming everyone is as false as they are. They project their guilt onto the world, and in doing so, they isolate themselves even further. This isolation isn't just social, it's spiritual. It severs them from the simple peace of being aligned with truth. In the larger scheme of things, betrayal always brings its own reckoning. Whether it's personal or systemic, deception cannot sustain itself forever. History proves this again and again. Empires built on exploitation eventually fall. Relationships built on manipulation collapse. Economies rooted in greed inevitably turn against those who profited most. The illusion of escaping consequences is short lived because human systems, emotional, moral, or social, are self correcting. They may bend under the weight of deceit for a while, but eventually they return to balance. The truth has patience. It waits until the lies have exhausted themselves. There's also an undeniable spiritual law at work in betrayal. Every dishonest act creates a dissonance between who you are and who you pretend to be. That dissonance demands resolution. Some call it karma, others call it conscience, but its essence is the same. What you send into the world eventually finds its way back to you. You might not be caught in the eyes of others, but you will always be seen by the quiet witness within yourself. That witness doesn't forget, and it doesn't forgive easily. It holds you accountable in the still moments when the noise fades and you're left alone with your thoughts. The most tragic part of betrayal is that it could have been avoided. The moment before betrayal, the brief hesitation before the lie, the signature, the secret act, always contains a choice to be honest, to stay loyal, to honor what's right. But once that moment is lost, the path forward narrows. Every step becomes an effort to defend what can no longer be defended. The betrayer begins to live in reaction rather than purpose, in fear rather than conviction. They may think they've escaped, but in truth, they've become a prisoner to their own deceit. In the end, no one truly escapes the consequences of betrayal. They may evade external judgment, but they cannot evade themselves. The illusion of getting away with it fades, leaving only the reality that trust once broken can never return untouched. The betrayer might continue to walk among others, but they do so as a shadow of who they once were. Every smile becomes a performance, every success a hollow echo. And when silence finally surrounds them, they'll come to see what was always true, that no one escapes the weight of betrayal, not because the world punishes them, but because the truth within them refuses to let them go. Trust is the invisible currency that sustains every relationship, every community, and every system of exchange. Without it, no promise, no agreement, no institution can endure. You can measure money, you can track assets, but trust is what gives those things meaning and stability. It is the foundation upon which both personal and economic life is built. When trust is betrayed, the cost is not simply emotional, it is profoundly economic. It disrupts the circulation of value, weakens cooperation, and corrodes the social structures that hold people together. The economics of trust reveals that every act of betrayal is not just a moral failure, it's a withdrawal from the collective wealth that keeps society alive. When two people engage in any form of exchange, whether it's business, friendship, or love, they are investing trust. They believe that promises will be honored, that words mean something, that intentions align with actions. This belief allows cooperation to flow freely without the constant need for protection or suspicion. But when betrayal enters, it breaks this flow. Suddenly, every future transaction becomes burdened with doubt. What once moved naturally now requires defense and verification. That's the hidden cost of betrayal. It replaces trust with surveillance, honesty with contracts, openness with calculation. In a broader sense, the same principle governs entire economies. Markets do not thrive on competition alone, they depend on a shared confidence that people will act with a basic level of integrity. The moment that confidence erodes, everything slows down. Investors hesitate, workers disengage, consumers retreat. You can have wealth on paper, but without trust, that wealth becomes unstable, fragile, even meaningless. The economy of trust is not about profit, it's about sustainability. It's what allows people to build systems that last beyond a single deal or generation. Betrayal, therefore, is not an isolated act. It's an infection that spreads through networks of cooperation. When a person, company, or government chooses deceit over honesty, the damage radiates outward. People who witness betrayal, even if they are not directly harmed, begin to lose faith in the larger system. They start to believe that honesty is naive and corruption is normal. This is how betrayal multiplies through cynicism, and cynicism, once rooted, is far more destructive than any single act of deceit because it kills the very belief that trust is possible. In economic terms, trust functions like credit. It must be earned, maintained, and protected. Just as banks fail when they lose public confidence, so too do societies collapse when they can no longer trust one another. The betrayals that begin small, cut corners, broken promises, quiet lies, accumulate until they form a culture of deception. In that culture, people no longer cooperate for mutual benefit, they compete for survival. What was once an economy of shared value turns into a battlefield of suspicion. Productivity declines not because people lack resources, but because they lack faith. No one builds for the future when betrayal defines the present. On a personal level, trust is also a kind of wealth. It allows a person to live without constant fear, to take risks, to form partnerships. To betray that trust is to steal a part of someone's security. It's a theft that cannot be repaid with money or apology, because what's lost is not tangible. It's the belief in reliability itself. Once that belief is broken, every future interaction becomes shadowed by uncertainty. The betrayed person becomes guarded, careful, less open. This creates a ripple effect where fewer connections are formed, fewer collaborations are attempted, fewer communities thrive. The economy of trust shrinks, and with it, the richness of human life. Even on a global scale, the same logic applies. When nations or corporations act without integrity, when they exploit, deceive, or manipulate, they may gain power or profit in the short term, but over time, those gains turn against them. People begin to resist, to demand transparency, to withdraw cooperation. Power without trust becomes hollow. It must rely on control rather than respect, on fear rather than faith. And fear, unlike trust, is expensive. It requires constant maintenance. Systems built on fear are inherently unsustainable because they consume energy without producing renewal. The most profound truth about the economics of trust is that it mirrors the law of reciprocity. You cannot take more than you give without unbalancing the system. If you betray others, you create scarcity of loyalty, of hope, of honesty, and that scarcity eventually reaches you. Betrayal may look profitable at first, but it's an illusion built on borrowed time. Every dishonest gain comes with an unseen debt that must be paid later, often with interest. The repayment comes in the form of isolation, reputation loss, or the collapse of credibility. Once trust is gone, no amount of material success can replace it. There's also a quiet dignity in protecting trust. It requires discipline, patience, and a deep respect for the interdependence of life. To honor trust is to recognize that our well being is tied to the well being of others. It is to understand that wealth, in its truest form, is collective. When trust flourishes, cooperation thrives, innovation becomes possible, peace takes root. People begin to dream again because they believe in the integrity of the system they inhabit. In the end, the economics of trust reminds us that the most valuable asset any person or society can hold is credibility. It cannot be bought or imposed. It must be earned and continually renewed. When betrayal threatens to erode it, the cost is immeasurable. Trust is not just a virtue, it is a form of social capital, the heartbeat of every human exchange. To protect it is to protect the future itself. Those who understand this truth never treat trust as expendable because they know what betrayal always forgets, that every dishonest act impoverishes not only the victim, but the world that both must live in afterward. The internal cost of betrayal is one of the most profound forms of suffering a person can experience, even if it hides beneath a mask of confidence or denial. It begins quietly, often unnoticed by those who commit the act. At first, there may be a rush of justification, a sense of victory, or even relief. The betrayer convinces themselves that what they did was necessary, clever, or harmless. But deep within, something begins to shift. The self, once whole and at peace, becomes divided. One part knows the truth, while the other tries desperately to forget it. This division is the birth of inner conflict, and it marks the beginning of a slow and inevitable unraveling. The mind cannot exist in harmony when it carries deceit. Human consciousness depends on coherence, the alignment between what one believes, what one says, and what one does. Betrayal disrupts that balance. It forces a person to live in contradiction, to maintain two opposing truths: the reality of their actions and the image they project. This creates an internal tension that grows heavier over time. No matter how carefully it's hidden, guilt seeps through. It shows in restless nights, forced smiles, and the quiet unease that never fully disappears. The betrayer begins to live in a shadow of themselves, unable to escape the echo of their own dishonesty. At first, they may suppress the guilt. They distract themselves with work, with success, with noise. But suppression is not healing, it's merely postponement. The mind can bury guilt, but it cannot destroy it. The more it's repressed, the deeper it embeds itself, turning into anxiety, irritability, or even self contempt. Betrayal eats away at self respect because no matter how many excuses are made, the inner self knows the truth. And when you know you've violated your own principles, it becomes impossible to look in the mirror without a quiet sense of shame. That shame doesn't always announce itself loudly. It can appear subtly through cynicism, distrust of others, or a loss of joy in simple things. Life becomes defensive instead of open. This is the great paradox of betrayal. While it is an act done to others, it damages the betrayer most deeply. The one who betrays believes they have gained something: freedom, advantage, or control. But what they've truly lost is peace. They have sacrificed the comfort of an honest mind. Every interaction that follows becomes a performance, because once you've deceived someone, you must continue to manage that deception. Lies require maintenance. They demand constant energy, constant vigilance. And with every new lie told to protect the old one, the burden grows heavier. It becomes exhausting to maintain the illusion. Eventually, the betrayer no longer remembers where the performance ends and their real self begins. That confusion is one of the deepest internal costs. It erodes identity. Betrayal forces a person to construct a version of themselves that others can believe in, while secretly knowing it's false. Over time, this duality fractures the psyche. The betrayer begins to distrust their own emotions because honesty feels dangerous. Vulnerability becomes impossible. To reveal anything real would be to risk exposure. So they retreat into emotional distance, living behind layers of defense. They stop connecting with others authentically because every connection threatens to uncover what they've hidden. In trying to protect themselves from consequence, they imprison themselves in isolation. There's also a moral cost, a spiritual depletion that words struggle to describe. Humans are not built to thrive in dishonesty. Integrity is not just a virtue, it's a source of internal strength. When someone betrays, they cut themselves off from that strength. They begin to live in moral debt, borrowing energy from falsehoods to sustain themselves. But lies are poor fuel. They burn quickly and leave behind only emptiness. That emptiness grows into a void, an ache that no success or pleasure can fill. The betrayer may try to cover it with achievements, distractions, or relationship, but none of it lasts. The void keeps whispering the same truth: peace cannot coexist with deceit. And yet, the internal cost is not merely punishment, it's also a reflection of conscience. The pain of guilt, the weight of shame, the restlessness of deceit. All of these are signs that a person still has some measure of awareness. They mean that truth is still alive within, trying to restore balance. The tragedy is that many people resist this inner call. Instead of facing their guilt, they double down on their lies, convincing themselves that they were right or that others deserved it. But denial only deepens the wound. Healing begins only when one admits the truth, not to the world, but to themselves. When a person finally faces the reality of their betrayal, the internal cost transforms. The guilt that once crushed them becomes the starting point for understanding. They see that betrayal wasn't strength, it was weakness disguised as strategy. They realize that honesty, though harder, is the only true liberation, but reaching that point requires courage. It requires surrendering pride and accepting that some damage cannot be undone. Forgiveness, when it comes, must begin within. The internal cost of betrayal is the soul's way of demanding truth. It is not vengeance, it is correction. It reminds the betrayer that integrity cannot be faked, that peace cannot coexist with deceit, and that no one escapes the quiet reckoning of their own conscience. You can fool others for a time, you can even fool yourself for a while, but the truth has a memory far longer than the lie, and in the still moments of life, when the noise fades and the mask slips, that truth always returns. It asks one simple question: was it worth it? And the honest answer, the one buried beneath all the excuses and denials, is always the same: no. Betrayal never remains a private matter. It ripples outward, touching lives far beyond those directly involved. Every act of deceit or disloyalty sends a message into the collective consciousness, shaping how people see each other, how they relate, and how they build communities. The social reflection of betrayal reveals the deep truth that society is not held together by laws or systems alone. It is held together by trust, by shared belief in fairness, honesty, and mutual respect. When betrayal enters the social fabric, it weakens those bonds. It breeds suspicion where there was once cooperation, and cynicism where there was once hope. At its core, society functions through invisible agreements. We believe that most people will act with some measure of integrity. We trust that promises will be kept, that leaders will serve their people, that institutions will protect rather than exploit. These assumptions are the unseen threads that make collective life possible. When they are broken, whether through personal deceit or systemic corruption, the damage is not just emotional, it's structural. People begin to question everything. The shared belief that keeps a society cohesive begins to dissolve, and in its place grows a quiet mistrust that changes how individuals interact with one another. The social cost of betrayal is that it normalizes dishonesty. When betrayal becomes common, when people see lies and corruption go unpunished, they start to internalize a dangerous message that integrity is weakness and deceit is the way to survive. This transformation is subtle but devastating. It shifts cultural values away from truth and cooperation toward self preservation and manipulation. Once this mindset takes root, the very foundation of social life begins to erode. Neighbors become competitors, colleagues become rivals, and the idea of community gives way to isolation. The betrayals that begin in boardrooms or behind closed doors end up shaping how entire populations think and behave. When trust disappears, society becomes transactional. People no longer help one another out of shared humanity, but out of calculation, asking, what's in it for me? Every exchange becomes conditional, every relationship temporary. This state of moral fragmentation leads to loneliness and alienation. The sense of belonging that defines human life weakens because betrayal teaches people to expect disappointment. They start to believe that loyalty is foolish, that everyone eventually acts out of self interest. The betrayal of one generation becomes the skepticism of the next. Children grow up in a world where honesty feels outdated, where betrayal isn't a violation but an expectation. The social reflection of betrayal also appears in institutions. When those in power betray the trust placed in them, it doesn't just harm their reputation, it corrodes the faith people have in the very systems meant to protect them. A government that lies, a corporation that exploits, a media that deceives, all contribute to a culture where truth loses value. And when truth loses value, chaos follows. People withdraw from participation because they no longer believe their voices matter. They stop voting, stop engaging, stop caring. A betrayed population becomes a passive one, resigned to a system they no longer trust. That resignation is the beginning of social decay. Betrayal also manifests in the microcosm of personal relationships, and the reflection is no less severe. Families, friendships, and partnerships are the basic units of any society. When betrayal enters these intimate spaces, it weakens the emotional fabric that binds communities together. Betrayal between individuals mirrors betrayal between institutions. It spreads disillusionment. When someone is betrayed by a friend, they begin to doubt friendship itself. When loyalty is broken in love, they begin to doubt love itself. The damage extends beyond the immediate wound. It becomes a cultural inheritance, a lingering hesitation to trust again. Yet, there is another side to the social reflection of betrayal, a possibility for awakening. When betrayal becomes visible, when people begin to see how deeply dishonesty corrodes their collective life, it can spark transformation. Awareness of betrayal can lead to a renewed hunger for truth. People begin to value integrity precisely because they have seen what happens in its absence. Movements for justice, transparency, and reform are often born from the ashes of betrayal. The exposure of deceit becomes the starting point for rebuilding a more honest society. The social mirror does not only reflect darkness, it can also reflect the collective decision to choose light. In that way, betrayal serves as both a warning and a teacher. It reveals the fragility of trust and the price of losing it. It reminds us that no system, no relationship, no civilization can survive long without truth at its center. Each act of betrayal, no matter how small, contributes to the erosion of the collective moral landscape. But every act of integrity, every defense of honesty repairs it. The reflection society sees in betrayal is ultimately a reflection of itself. If betrayal dominates, it means the culture has forgotten how sacred trust is. If truth prevails, it means people have remembered. In the end, the social reflection of betrayal is a mirror held up to humanity. It shows us what happens when we trade integrity for advantage, when we choose convenience over conscience. The cracks it exposes are not just in others, they are in all of us. But awareness brings power. Once we see how deeply betrayal damages the collective spirit, we also see how vital it is to protect truth. For a society that cannot trust itself cannot thrive. Its people live as strangers, bound by fear rather than by faith. But a society that values honesty and holds betrayal accountable begins to heal. It rebuilds its foundation, one act of integrity at a time, until trust once again becomes the currency that sustains its soul. There is a balance that exists beneath all things, a quiet, unseen rhythm that governs the rise and fall of actions and consequences. Betrayal may appear to escape that rhythm for a time, moving unseen through lies and deception, but sooner or later, life restores its order. This restoration is what can be called moral correction. It is not revenge, not divine punishment, but the natural return of equilibrium. Every betrayal disturbs that balance, and every life, every society eventually moves to correct it. The correction may not come in the form of public justice, but it always arrives through loss, isolation, or an awakening of conscience that leaves no room for peace until truth is faced. When someone betrays another, they believe they are stepping ahead, outsmarting the system, bypassing consequence. But the moral structure of existence doesn't operate on human timing. It is patient, precise, and inescapable. It waits until the deceiver has settled into comfort, until they believe they've succeeded, and then it begins to unfold. The correction doesn't need external punishment, it begins within. It starts as restlessness, then turns into guilt, and later into the slow recognition that what was gained is worth far less than what was lost. Life has an extraordinary way of ensuring that no deception goes unpaid, not because it seeks vengeance, but because truth is the only stable ground on which life can stand. Moral correction often comes disguised as suffering. People wonder why their relationships fail, why their peace disappears, why their achievements feel empty. They search for answers outside themselves, unaware that they are living the delayed consequences of their own actions. Betrayal may have offered them power or advantage in the moment, but it stripped away something far more essential, their integrity. And when integrity is lost, every part of life becomes distorted. Success loses meaning, pleasure turns shallow, and even love becomes uncertain. That hollow feeling, the one that no accomplishment can fill, is moral correction in its most intimate form. It's the soul's way of calling a person back to honesty. In the larger sense, moral correction operates on a collective level as well. Societies built on deceit and exploitation eventually collapse under their own weight. Corruption, once tolerated, grows until it becomes unbearable. People who once remained silent begin to demand truth. The oppressed rise, the exploited resist, and what seemed like stability crumbles into revelation. History repeats this lesson endlessly. No empire, no institution, no leader can escape the moral correction that follows betrayal. It may take years or centuries, but it always comes. What begins as hidden corruption ends in exposure. What begins as silence ends in the roar of accountability. The balance of justice is slow, but it never forgets. The process of correction, however, is not purely destructive, it is also creative. It clears away illusion, forces reflection, and makes space for renewal. When a person confronts the consequences of betrayal, when they finally see the pain they've caused or the integrity they've lost, they are presented with a choice. They can deny and continue to decay, or they can admit, repent, and rebuild. The pain of correction becomes the soil of transformation. It humbles arrogance, dissolves denial, and opens the heart to empathy. In that humility, a person can find a kind of redemption, not the erasure of their mistake, but the wisdom born from it. The scars remain, but they become reminders of what honesty costs and what it's worth. Moral correction also teaches that no one is beyond accountability. In a world obsessed with appearances and success, it's easy to believe that those with power can rewrite morality. But truth is not a law that can be amended, it is a force that persists beyond human control. You can bury it under lies, distract from it with noise, but it remains, waiting to emerge, and when it does, it exposes everything. The moment of exposure is not the punishment, it's the revelation. It shows that what was built on falsehood could never have lasted. It reminds both the betrayer and the world that justice, in its deepest form, is not imposed, it's inevitable. The beauty of moral correction lies in its fairness. It does not discriminate between the mighty and the meek. It does not rely on external courts or public opinion. It happens in silence, in the private chambers of the heart. The betrayer may escape judgment from others, but they cannot escape themselves. There is a point when the weight of deceit becomes unbearable, when the peace of living truthfully feels like the only salvation left. That point of surrender is the beginning of redemption. The correction fulfills itself not through punishment, but through awakening. For those who have been betrayed, understanding this truth brings a kind of peace. It reminds them that they need not seek revenge or demand retribution. Time and truth will deliver what justice requires. The one who betrays carries their own sentence, written not by the world, but by their own conscience. The universe does not forget, it simply waits. And when it acts, it does so with precision, restoring balance in ways that words can barely describe. In the end, moral correction is not about destruction, it's about restoration. It brings life back into alignment with truth. Betrayal, no matter how painful, becomes part of that larger order, teaching those who commit it and those who endure it that honesty is not just a virtue but a necessity. Everything false eventually collapses, and everything true eventually endures. That is the unspoken law of existence, the quiet, relentless force that ensures that no betrayal, no matter how hidden, escapes the reach of truth. Integrity often emerges not in moments of comfort, but in times of collapse. It rises when the cost of deceit becomes unbearable, when the consequences of betrayal have stripped away illusion, and when people realize that without truth, nothing lasting can be built. The rise of integrity is not sudden, it's a slow, deliberate awakening, a return to the moral center that betrayal once tried to destroy. It is the rediscovery of strength in honesty, courage in transparency, and dignity in consistency. For those who have walked through the wreckage of deception, integrity becomes not just a virtue, but a form of survival. When someone betrays or deceives, they live divided. But when integrity rises, that division begins to heal. The self, once fractured between the truth and the lie, starts to come together again. This process can be painful because it requires facing the damage done, not just to others, but to oneself. Integrity demands honesty, not only outwardly, but inwardly. It requires admitting what was wrong, acknowledging what was lost, and choosing to rebuild without excuses. In doing so, a person begins to regain something deeper than forgiveness. They regain self respect, and self respect, once restored, becomes an unshakable foundation upon which to live. The rise of integrity often begins with a simple recognition that living in deceit is exhausting. Lies require constant maintenance, truth requires only courage. Once someone has experienced the burden of dishonesty, they begin to crave the simplicity of being whole. They begin to understand that freedom does not come from getting away with something, it comes from having nothing to hide. Integrity frees the mind from fear. It restores the ability to look others in the eye without flinching, to speak without rehearsing, to exist without pretending. That kind of peace cannot be bought. It can only be earned by living truthfully. In a broader sense, the rise of integrity extends beyond the individual. It becomes a collective renewal. Societies built on betrayal eventually reach a breaking point where people no longer trust leaders, institutions, or even each other. But in that breakdown lies an opportunity. Out of disillusionment grows a hunger for authenticity. People begin to value truth, tellers more than entertainers, substance more than image. Integrity, once dismissed as naive, becomes revolutionary. It becomes the force that rebuilds communities, reforms institutions, and restores meaning to words like justice and equality. This rise does not come easily. Integrity asks for sacrifice. It means standing firm when it would be easier to yield, speaking truth when silence would be safer, choosing fairness over convenience. It often isolates those who practice it because the world is not always kind to the honest. Yet, integrity draws strength from that very struggle. It does not depend on approval, it depends on conviction. Those who live with integrity understand that doing what is right is its own reward. They may face losses in the short term, opportunities denied, relationships strained, but they gain something far more enduring, a clear conscience and a steady heart. The rise of integrity also redefines what strength means. In a world obsessed with winning, power is often measured by dominance or control. But true strength lies in restraint, in the ability to act with principle even when no one is watching. Integrity transforms the idea of success. It replaces the pursuit of advantage with the pursuit of alignment, where one's actions, words, and values all point in the same direction. This kind of success is quiet, often unseen, but it carries a force that endures long after temporary victories have faded. The powerful may rule for a season, but the honest build legacies that last generations. On a personal level, integrity heals the wounds left by betrayal. It rebuilds relationships not through empty apologies, but through consistent truthfulness over time. It teaches that trust is not regained by words, but by evidence, by actions that align with promises. The rise of integrity allows forgiveness to take root, not because the past is forgotten, but because it is faced. In that honesty, both the betrayed and the betrayer can find liberation. One learns to believe again, the other learns to be worthy of belief. In the spiritual sense, integrity connects a person to something larger than themselves. It aligns the individual with the natural order of truth, where cause and consequence are balanced. Living with integrity brings clarity because it removes the distortions that deceit creates. Life becomes simpler, decisions cleaner, purpose stronger. Integrity is not perfection, it's persistence. It's the daily choice to live in truth despite temptation, fear, or pressure. Each act of honesty, however small, becomes a declaration of freedom. The rise of integrity is also a collective responsibility. A culture that rewards deception cannot produce honest leaders. A community that celebrates manipulation cannot sustain trust. For integrity to thrive, people must choose it together. They must hold themselves and each other accountable, not out of judgment, but out of care for the common good. Every time truth is defended, every time loyalty is honored, every time someone refuses to betray what's right for personal gain, integrity rises a little higher. It spreads quietly, like light through cracks in the dark, until it becomes strong enough to transform everything around it. In the end, integrity is not an ideal, it is a necessity. Without it, individuals lose peace, societies lose unity, and humanity loses direction. Betrayal may seem powerful, but it is always temporary. Integrity, though slower to rise, is permanent. It endures through hardship, through temptation, through time. It may be challenged, mocked, or suppressed, but it never disappears. It waits patiently for truth to matter again. And when it rises, as it always does, it reminds the world that the greatest strength is not in deceit, but in the courage to remain whole in a world that constantly tempts you to break.